Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hope King of Axios and our esteemed panel.
Hi. Hello. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Hope King. I cover business for Axios out of New York, and I have the great privilege of moderating this next session with two wonderful guests who have been at the forefront of championing sustainability. I want to please introduce Alexandra Palt. She's the Chief Responsibility Officer of L'Oreal, and William McDonough, who is the Chief Executive of McDonough Innovations, architect and designer. I want to start off by talking about what's happened in the past 2 years. You know, we've seen the pandemic stall supply chains. We've seen consumer demand grow. Has that halted or has that propelled sustainability efforts at the corporate level? Alexandra, I'll start with you.
Yes, good morning. So I think there is not a single answer. It depends very much on the company, and I think it depends also on what kind of maturity stage the company was. So when I look what happened at L'Oreal, as we have started our transformation in the years 2012 already, when COVID came, there was a moment where I asked myself, what's responsibility, sustainability, all our commitment to society, what kind of place is this going to take now? And actually, what was interesting is that accelerated our transformation. So it was kind of an additional proof point that pandemias are coming, of course, with biodiversity loss and climate change. It was an additional proof point of how interconnected we are with systemic, with a catastrophe of that scale. And we know that COVID was a small thing compared to what is coming. And actually at L'Oreal, it accelerated the transformation. So we have taken much more transformative commitments in 2020, science-based targets. We have invested more in society, more in women, more in innovation, because all our leaders, the board and the executive committee, were aware that this is a very strong sign of where the future will go and that we have to live up to that challenge.
Bill, from your perspective as well, you work across multiple companies. Did you see a change in the pace of innovation towards sustainability during the pandemic?
I did, and I think for a whole number of reasons, but one, I think what Alexandra said is important. We're coming together with a common issue, which is climate. And it's become clear to most thinking people that this is a critical issue. I opened the G20 in Riyadh 2 years ago on energy and climate, and 40 people debated for a year, getting ready for the world leaders on climate and energy. And we had written a protocol called circular carbon economy to go with the circular economy, because we realized carbon is both a material and a fuel. But the reason I bring it up is that at the end, because I got to listen to it the whole time, when it went virtual, they forgot to take me off the invite list, so I could listen. And at the end, the minister in Saudi Arabia said, Bill, what do you think happened here? And I said, two things. One is that everybody can put away their sharp instruments now. No more Swiss Army knives or daggers. We all agreed the Paris goals. We all agreed. That's one. And when that happens, to your point, all of a sudden, the question is no longer what's wrong with the way you're doing something. There's only one question, which is how can I help you? That's it. And I think that's the sense right now, because sustainability has been a very vague concept. It sort of sounds like maintenance. And when I won the Presidential Award for Sustainable Development, President Clinton, at the White House in 1995. And the press came up and said, Mr. Sustainable. I said, I'm not interested in sustainability. Well, what is your relationship to your spouse? If you said sustainable, it's not that exciting, really. So I think what we've all realized is that sustainability is actually intergenerational stewardship. That's what it is. And that's what you see in all the companies. People are saying, wait a minute, these are our children. This is what we do. This is all one thing. And we have to come up with language that they can benefit from and use. And delight in. So I think that there is common purpose now.
At Axios, we look at big ideas and big themes. And I wonder, Alexandra, you also are a huge champion of empowering women. How do those two ideas maybe work together, sustainability, but also empowering women at this moment?
So I think there is, when we look, there was in general a little bit of difference between how European and how Anglo-Saxon and American corporates looked at the issue. Because historically in Europe, it's the state taking care of social welfare, of a certain number of issues. So philanthropy in Europe was always very small, you know, very little amounts of money. American NGOs, often when they want to work with us, they are really, they do not feel respected because our amounts are so small in Europe. But that is because the state is taking care of a number of issues. On the other side, in Europe, you had very much that issue about your own sustainable business transformation. Do the right thing, transform your business. Don't do business as usual and just give money away, but change the way you're doing. And now what we see is that it comes a little bit together in Europe and the US and the Anglo-Saxon world. So in Europe, we still have the be best in class, do what it needs to transform your business. But we also learned that we will have to contribute to the big societal challenges. And we have learned that because what is very clear is that the environmental transition is not going to work, or the transformation of businesses, of societies is not going to happen if there is not also not a more inclusive society. We need the system to work for everybody, because otherwise, as long as people don't have food on their plate, they are not interested in long-term issues. So I think everybody has understood now that the two go together, that you have to transform your business to operate within the planetary boundaries, and at the same time to have to contribute to the big societal issues. So we have invested a lot in women and in gender equality. Historically, with the L'Oreal Foundation for Women in Science, most of you have seen in the airports our Women in Science campaign. But we also have created after COVID or during COVID a fund where we give funds to very small community organizations working for women's rights. Because a lot of very big organizations receive a lot of money, and for the small it is very difficult. And during COVID in France, we were very connected to the ground, and we saw that the difference is really the people who at the small organization were very close to their beneficiaries and to communities could help much more efficiently. And at the same time, they were in danger because, economic crisis and so on. And so we thought we have a role to play here in order to keep these communities working and functioning, and that's important for democracy too. And so we created that fund, which is now operating all over the world.
Right, and you need to have it at the local level. It can't just be
exactly
from the top down. Just backstage, we were chatting about some news that's sort of breaking, and I'm glad that you brought up the difference between the European sort of state of mind and really philosophy versus what's been happening here in the States. There's been some new anti-ESG efforts, notably from conservative investors, backings from Peter Thiel and Bill Ackman. There is an investor who is now escalating his anti-ESG efforts. We're seeing this in the States, in Texas, in Florida, right? A lot of politicians are coming out now and saying, we don't need this sort of quote unquote woke capitalism in our country and in our capital markets. I'm wondering how you both have been watching this develop, and if you think this will derail any of the efforts that have been put into place over the past couple of decades.
It's a surprise.
It's a surprise.
It is a surprise, and I think it'll play itself out in a way that it deserves to, which is that people will wake up to the magical force of people collaborating. And I remember having the head of an investment bank for dinner when I lived in a house designed by Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson always asked people, can you tell us about the world that we don't know because you're in a different world? And I said, so tell us from the finance world what you see. He said, I don't know what you're asking. I said, what's the secret of Wall Street? He said, it's the creation of the perception of scarcity where none exists. Okay? And when we look at this idea of just focusing on the money And we start talking about a kind of society that asks the question, how much can I get for how little I give? We realize we're coming into a new world where we have to ask questions like, how much can we give for all that we get? Because I think it needs to focus more on, instead of limits and greed, which is what we're looking at here, single dimension, money. We do have to look at society. We do have to look at the natural systems because they are the sources of life and of human engagement. So it's clear that this is coming, and we can share the abundance, and it's much more fun. And like you said, all sustainability, like politics, is local. So it adds that other dimension to it. So it's not just big players moving around big chunks of money. It's people with lives. It's not just consumers with lifestyles. These are people with lives. They have children. They need to eat. They need to be clothed. And it should be done with grace and dignity. And if you do it well, you can be very successful in any dimension you wish. But there's more than one dimension. So life is much richer than people who are accumulating financial wealth.
I mean, I don't think you should tell this audience everything. I think the question really is from a strategy perspective. If you're hearing investors now, maybe from this camp, coming to you and saying, you need to stop doing all of these things, what is your response?
No, I think that is a good thing about a company that is here for more than 110 years, that wants to be here for another 100 years. We have a long-term perspective. You have to imagine that at L'Oreal, we had like 5 CEOs in 100 years. So that gives you a notion of long-term. And I think that notion of long-term is extremely essential if you have questions like this, because you are not just responding to a quarterly or yearly performance evaluation as a CEO. You're responding to the challenge of keep the company for future generations. And so your mindset is very different. And I think this is important. L'Oreal has a very strong value system that is also inspired by family ownership for a long time. So I think our answer would be very, very clear about that. And let's not forget that there are a lot of investors that are quite aware of climate change, the risk for business, the risk for successful business in the future. So I wouldn't be too worried. But what is interesting about it is that there is still not, there are still people who haven't understood that this is a critical time in history. I'm from Austria, and I grew up in a moment where Austrians looked back to their history and to their personal and collective responsibility during the Shoah. And I think that really formed this. It's part of my identity and how I look at things. And it's true that it's very difficult to understand that people now look at a challenge the world is facing where we are talking about the extinction of human species. And we know that the poorest, the women, the most underprivileged groups who have already suffered a lot will suffer even more, and they do already. People die already before that. So the question is on which side of history you want to stand, and our choice is very clear about that, and I hope a lot of people are aware that individual and collective responsibility has to be engaged now.
I don't think we'll have the answers on this stage, but if any of you have insights and you want to share with me after, please come up to me and share. But talking about personal responsibility, one last question I wanted to end with is how you are making your own personal lives more sustainable. What are some things that you've adopted in your life? I compost a lot. I'm meticulous about recycling. I'm tearing away the packages and sorting. What have you done in your own life to make sure that you live more sustainably?
I'm with you on composting. I love composting. I do a lot of that. I'm a designer, so all the buildings I've designed since 1980s are all renewably powered. I design buildings like trees. And I think the big project I'm working on now is redesigning concrete. Concrete is responsible for 8% of the greenhouse gases. We don't need to burn limestone. It's a very old idea. So we can start moving from physics and burning things to very subtle chemistries and achieve the same result at room temperature with grace and dignity. So there's a whole series of things we're looking at of how to redesign design itself. so that we can look at the natural world, and instead of saying, these are our resources, no, they're not. They're sources. It's our job to turn them into resources. Nature provides us with sources. So I think that's what I look at, is how to work in ways that train the people to design using nature as a model and a mentor instead of an inconvenience.
So I think there are things I have to do as a leader at L'Oréal, as a person, because actually when you're a sustainability leader, and that's something I would like to share, there is a little bit about expertise, but there is a lot about your capacity to push it, to ask questions, to be courageous, to challenge, to not be afraid, to try to stretch but not break it. So as an employee, I have responsibilities. And as an individual, so I think first of all, to understand that every gesture counts. And that is very important because it's so big that we all can say, oh, it's so big, makes no difference whatever I do. And I don't believe that. I think when you can act, you have the responsibility to. But at the same time, without the enormous guilt thing. So you don't have to be perfect. It is not a photo, it's a film. It's not a short story, it's a novel. We transform. So I have changed a lot of things in my personal life too. A lot of train, a lot no meat. No, the biggest carbon footprint of L'Oréal is when you take hot baths or showers. So please make it less hot, less long. That is already a lot of less carbon emissions for us and for you. And no food waste, and that's difficult here. Yesterday I went to a shop to buy something to eat and I thought, how do you manage here to not have food waste? Everything is so big, So food waste, important issue. So there are many, many, many gestures that you can make and that you can teach to your children, and don't expect yourself to be perfect. You still have things where you cannot be. We live in a system. Completely sustainable lives are not possible in the system, but we can be a power for change. And the smallest thing is already a responsibility and a success.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me on stage today, Bill and Alexandra. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.